Welcome back, everybody, to your daily update on the state of the Malazan Empire. We're here to talk more about Midnight Tides, Book 1. I just finished it a couple of hours ago, and I'm full of things I need to talk about, I suspect. Quick update on the leg warmer thing. Basically done. I'll finish the entire thing later tonight, so I can ship them off tomorrow when I need to go to the post office and drop off a ton of CDs and some vinyls, but mostly CDs at the moment. Um, so yeah, that's because the music industry never sleeps, even if it's just one person running it out of their bedroom. Anyway, so much for that. Let's talk about Midnight Tides. So let's go. Cheers. That was not very impressive. Anyway, cheers. All right. So, what is there to talk about that I didn't talk about in the first one on Midnight Tides Book 1? Well, we kind of get more, like, basically shown the rest of the, not the entire rest, but some of the rest of the crew of characters that apparently are our new viewpoint characters. There is obviously no overlap with the other previous books, except Thrall Sengar, whom we have met before in House of Chains. Well, that's basically it so far. And we continue our investigation into both the culture of the Letheri and the culture of the Tristedur, which sets up this conflict of cultures. I don't like the word clash of cultures. I think it's highly problematic in how it's used nowadays, but we certainly see that there is two ways of living that are on a collision course here. And what I find interesting there is that while it's very, very clear that the Letheri are the aggressors in the situation, there is a certain part within the Edur community that is also very much in for war. So the idea of a peaceful coexistence is something that both sides, or at least parts of both sides, really don't want to deal with. But we'll see how all of that goes over time, because that's not something that has happened yet. So let's look at some things that have happened. We get a bit more introduction into the whole setup of the Letheri culture. We meet, we've met all three Benedict brothers at this point. We get through these mentions and stuff like that. A clearer insight into how Letheri society works, how much the drive for wealth, well, let's just call it capitalism, like even late stage capitalism, that's basically driving Letheras there. How that has formed a society, how it has definitely also damaged a lot of people within this society. We also get a look at the whole setup of the court in Letheras. We haven't met the king yet. We have met the queen. We have met the first consort, the first concubine, the first eunuch. We have not met the first. Actually, we haven't met the first consort yet. But anyway, we see how it is like a very, dare I say, Byzantine arrangement all round. With all these strict rules and a lot of this intrigue that has become so very, very synonymous with Byzantine politics. Although for Byzantine politics, so far no one has been blinded, which is usually what happened in Byzantine politics. If you actually really want to look that kind of thing up, it's interesting. It tells you a lot about human cruelty, but yeah, I don't know. Go check out Edward Gibbon if you really want to learn more about Byzantine power politics. That's not what this is about today. But yeah, we see that there is all these different forces within the palace. We once again see this idea of the seven seventh closure coming up, and something, the prophecy, this spirit that I mentioned in my Saturday video on exceptionalism and religion, this idea of this almost millenarian spirit within within Letheras, with the idea of that seventh closure coming up and something happening, and that obviously is highly problematic. We also meet have obviously see more of Tehol. What I like about the way how Tehol, obviously I do very much enjoy the discussions between Tehol and Bug. That's a literary thing that we need to talk about in another video again. But the way the Benedict family is introduced and how we learn about what made them the people they are and so forth is handled so very well, as far as I think. We have that discussion about Benedict when Tehol and Bryce talk about him, and that one is just like the way it is. Basically, we learn everything we wanted to learn about, well, everything we get to learn to know about the parents of those three Benedict brothers. Apparently, there was a suicide because of debt, because of economic pressure. Their father apparently took his own life, and obviously it ended with their mother also dying in some way. We see all of these things, like the way these are introduced to give background to the characters, to give background to those three and how they act and react and how they deal with all these things, is very, very well handled. We also see that despite the rather funny appearance that Tehol puts out, especially when we read all these dialogues between him, the discussion between him and Bug and everything, which is all fun and games, but we see there is this rather tragic and angry person underneath it, the ruthless one who wants to take the whole thing down, the whole system down, be it in revenge to what happened to his parents, or because he actually sees that there might be something to do afterwards. But these edges, that Tehol is actually a rather ruthless and hard bastard underneath all these, like, rather funny, absurd discussions, is something that I think is worked out really well there, because you can see those things really early on, but you can also ignore them if you don't pay close attention. It will take a while for you to realize that he is actually more of a mastermind than you might think, even though everyone tells you all the time, yeah, he managed that. He got like super rich and then lost it all. Or maybe not, because he actually then did something very humane, which is buying these islands and sending a lot of these occupied cultures of people of those to those islands, apparently, to build up or rebuild or keep their culture, their traditions, and their lives. And on the other side, we have those Sengar brothers. We have the dutiful one, and that's like the interesting thing, how clearly they sort of mirror each other, like not completely, but in a way. Like Fierce Sengar, while he is the oldest one, he certainly has like this role of a weapons master, which is not the same as King's Champion, which is what Bryce had. But you see, they are both families are connected to the ruling houses in a way. What I find interesting is how understandable I find Roulette as a character this time round. And this is something that bothers me a lot, but maybe it's also a sign of me actually becoming more self-aware. But the idea is, as a young adult or adolescent in that tribal society that pays so much attention to status and stuff like that, this warrior society, his strutting and chafing at like the rules and everything, I find that very like understandable. It's not a likable trait, but it's something that I find more and more understandable. Where you have the more somber-minded troll who sees all of these things as a problem. He is, in his way, a traditionalist, but someone who actually takes traditions serious in a way where he actually examines them, looks at them, and does not just follow the rules and just goes through the motions. And that obviously is always worrying and problematic because most people pay lip service to any kind of tradition, but bend the traditions and rules for their own advancement or to make their life easier. And he doesn't do that. He suffers with all of that, which makes him, I think, a character that's easy to like because of his like open honesty and all these things. And that makes it super easy to then ignore that he's also causing damage with, like, I mean, I get it why he's suspicious of Rulad and everything like that, but he causes damage there, and that can be a lesson there, because if there's one thing that our good friend Thrall Sengar does not have, it's tact and diplomacy. He just doesn't do that. He's like, I'm honest, and I care about these things, so fuck you and your feelings. And yeah, that's a problem, obviously, because people are people and not just automatons that follow rules. That's not how it works, and he just doesn't get it. Which I find interesting because it's one of those things that he actually mentioned before when he's walking with what's his name? With Onrak, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm very young and very innocent," and you kind of it's very easy to forget that, but yeah, he acts like someone with like basically no life experience once again, in a different way than Rulad. But Rulad is the youngest son, and being the youngest son with like youngest kid within a family of with more siblings is always problematic, because you always feel either like the one that is like pampered or the one who has to prove himself even harder than anyone else, because you have to live up to all the things your older siblings already managed. That's obviously also not hard, not easy. So yeah, I guess the big one for me was to realize how much, while I don't like Rulad, how much sympathy I have for him, or how much understanding I have for his behavior at the moment, which yeah, is interesting. For me, on a personal level, that was just very interesting to realize that. All right. Now let's look at the next bit. The next bit being Featherwitch and Udiness. And while there are some scenes in there that I think should be very, very interesting to keep in mind for later on, and for people who are interested in lore, that dream that Udiness has that maybe is not a dream, where near the end of chapter 5, where he sees that being that might is very, very likely a Forkroll Assail, frozen in ice, with his head being struck from behind and something dragged out of there, and a child's footsteps leading away from that. Then you compare that to other things. When you compare that to the situation with Kettle, when we get introduced to Kettle, and how Bryce Benedict sees basically the drag marks of a child dragging away that body. Like, not saying anything here, not suggesting anything here, just keep those things in mind. They might come up later on at some point. But in general, the Udiness versus Featherwitch discussion is a very interesting one. On the one hand, because they're both slaves, but they transport, or at least Featherwitch kind of takes over a lot of like all the bad traits of Lethery society into the like into their slavery. It's like, yeah, you cannot. She decides that she cannot have anything to do with Udiness because he's an indebted and she is not an indebted. Which, they're both slaves, so fuck that. But um I guess it's the other end of like the thing that we saw within the Chain of Dogs, where you have the nobles also like sticking to like privileges of their nobility in a situation where that totally doesn't matter at all. And you have the same situation here again, in a way, where you have two people like where you have people who live outside of their society, but they cling to those rules, to those structures of their home society in a way from before things were like not strange, but before things changed irrevocably in a way. I think that's one part that you can see there. So it's like almost like a safety net. On the other hand, you can also see that since these are like very, very negative aspects of Lethery society, and that those are the ones that are the hardest to get rid of, the hardest to actually get out of your system and realize that they're basically don't make any sense. It's like, yeah, I'm a slave, but at least I'm not an indebted slave. What's the actual difference? And obviously Udiness realizes those things, but Udiness is a more cynical person overall. Cynical in a sort of highly problematic way, because most of that cynicism is turned against himself. And I'm obviously not the one who has any qualifications to talk about these kind of mental health issues that you might want to attribute to our good friend Udiness, because there's certainly some there. And well, he was just raped, and that's an interesting situation there, because we don't see that too much in epic fantasy. Like sexual violence against men is not something that is very prominent there. So it's cool that this happens. Well, it's not cool that this happens, but it's a positive thing that it is mentioned here and has its place there as well. We will find out what the actual meaning of that act of rape there will be in the future. That's gonna be... There are consequences to these kinds of actions, obviously, and we'll need to face them later on. But we need to talk about sexuality within Midnight Tides in general. The rather... like, I don't know, the focus on Ublala Pong and his big dick is a rather interesting thing there, because it's once again something that in this way is rather rare within like fantasy, within literature in general. Well, once again, it's something that you find these kind of very explicit sexual allusions and stuff like that are something that you find a lot within authors of the more like postmodern era. Your Thomas Pynchons, your Umberto Ecos, up to a point. Those are the ones that are very much more into a slightly ironic, slightly humorous, sometimes at least, description of sexuality, sexual aspects, and so forth. And I feel that's an influence that you can find here within Letheras and with both Ublala Pong and like the whole overall aspect of Letheras, which is in general something that I find interesting. I said yesterday, not yesterday, I said when I was talking about it on Friday, that the city of Lether is very much, reminds me very much of Ankh Morpork from Discworld. There's more to it, but it's a for an empire that is basically stuck in the past because it has not was not forced to evolve at all over centuries, being basically the absolute apex predator on its continent in a way. It has this weird thing of somehow being super modern, like compared to other aspects of the fantasy world, with its like emphasis on capitalism, on consumerism, on on just on these very modern contemporary issues. On the one hand, the way it Erickson deals with questions like sexuality, themes like sexuality and stuff like that in there. These are super, super modern. And on the other hand, the city is basically stuck in the past from its mentality, which I found an interesting. There's an interesting tension there, is what I'm trying to say, I guess. So yeah, that's something that I found interesting and something that I definitely feel will return to in the upcoming videos on Midnight Tides. There will be more talk of these things, I'm very, very sure. Now, obviously, the idea of the drownings and people literally being dragged down by their debts until they drown is something that I found. Well, it makes a strong image. It might just be a bit too on the nose for an allegory, but it's certainly effective, and I personally have no problems with it. But yeah, that's just also something that I found there. All right, another thing that we need to talk about is once again religion and problems with a false narrative and a false history. Because we have that situation where the Sengar brothers find out that Father Shadow, also known as Scabandari Bloodeye, is dead or at least destroyed, and his soul probably put into another Finnest, wherever he may have ended up. At this point, we don't need to know. But the point there is, there's another parallel to the Teblor Toblikai history at the beginning of House of Chains, where you also have a fabricated history on which tradition is then built, and this brings a lot of danger with it in a way. It's like people have been that are lied to for ages and build their entire identity on that kind of lie. That brings a lot of problems with it, and whether you call it like a problem of religion or of tradition, I tend to see it, while they obviously worship Father Shadow and stuff like that. I don't want to put it too much into a religion or criticism of religion kind of direction, because in the end, it works with any kind of ideology or any kind of fake tradition. It doesn't matter whether you talk about, I don't know, your monotheistic religions that people like to criticize, or if you're talking about stupid bullshit neo-paganism, or like romantic ideas of a tradition or historical tradition, of folk tradition that people built up in like the 19th century to, underpin their ideas of nationalism. The idea is it's not about religion, it's about lying about, it's about constructing a past on which you build your current ideology and nationalism. And that's something that we see there now. Obviously with the Teblor, those were constructed by the outside. It's a bit more different, it's a bit different with the Edur, obviously, but it's still the same thing at work there. It's like you construct an identity of yourself as a people with your tradition and your past. You build and you base your current actions on that tradition, and that tradition is a lie. And to be aware of that, be aware of the fact that history can be used as a weapon, and history can be used as a construction. That's something that is obviously important outside of Malazan and inside of Malazan. And yeah, I just found it interesting that it basically turns up here again. And it's always important to look, like, I mean, not always important, right? I feel this is important, and we'll see how it turns out this time. Now, at the end of book one, we come to that point. We have all our players in place. We have all those dire omens. Something dangerous will happen at the beginning of the seventh closure. There's this spirit, this atmosphere of oncoming doom, this millenarian atmosphere or feeling in the air that's there. And we have seen that all our players that we've spoken about and talked to, not all of them, but almost all of them are broken. Like, everyone here has a lot of struggles in them. None of them are like perfect human beings, whether they are cis or a human. That doesn't matter here, but none of them are even slightly prepared to deal with the oncoming thing, that you have this big sense of doom basically rising in the past. We don't have that. Everyone knows it's a terrible idea what will come. Everyone knows it's going to be terrible, but no one's able to stop it, and no one's prepared to actually has any like qualifications to deal with it. So yeah, I suspect it's gonna be real interesting. It's gonna get really interesting very soon, because this might just be a clusterfuck. And we'll see how much of a clusterfuck it is tomorrow when we talk more about Midnight Tides. I hope you'll have a great start to the week, and I'll talk to you tomorrow about more Midnight Tides. Until then, cheers.